Hello everyone, how are we all doing? Come on in, sit on down. We've got a good show for you guys today. I've got David on from Bible Scribe YouTube channel. Now this guy, people have been telling me to talk to him for so long, and sadly because I have a pretty booked up calendar, you've had to wait, but today's the day. I have him on. He's here with me now. David, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm great, Paul. Thanks so much for having me. I think this is going to be a good discussion. I've dipped in and out of your channel a little bit too, so I know what you're all about and what you've been doing. And yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
No, not a problem at all. The pleasure's all mine, really. It's funny because I was in your show today because you do your Sunday service show every day, don't you?
Yeah.
Like a bit of a Sunday show, and I've dipped in that in the past, and I just said hello in there today, and I thought it was funny because someone asked you, "What do you think of the Nephilim clown thing?" And I was like, oh God, here we go. Like, because the thing is, I don't expect anybody to have any clue what that's about. Like, I don't, and this is what we're talking about today is completely separate from it. But in your defense, what you said, you touched on quite a few key, like your
Hey.
power of deduction and your take on it from knowing nothing at all about the theory. You
Okay.
actually hit a few of the key points about
Well,
the
I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you
yeah
for saying it. I
that
didn't know if you stick around for the whole thing and heard some of that or what, but
I
yeah,
did. Luckily I did actually because I went away to make something to eat for dinner, and then I came back and you were just talking about it. I was like, oh, "This is interesting." And
yeah,
you mentioned the red-haired giants of America. You mentioned the city
yep,
car and the Paiute Indians and the cannibalistic giants of North American plains. You mentioned the double rows of teeth found on the skeletons that
yep.
have been dug up all through the 1800s. You mentioned obviously the wide smile, the red lips, the cannibalistic nature. You hit on quite a lot of quite a few of the points I do hit on occasionally in my
All right.
body of work. So I was actually thoroughly impressed for somebody who has no idea to you made those connections.
Well,
So yeah,
I guess I should say I do know a bit about the Nephilim, but matching
yeah.
the two concepts together, obviously you've done a ton of work on that. So I feel like I definitely want to look more into what you've done and kind of, I may get your book because it just sounds really good. So
Well, absolutely, you can get it on Amazon. You get your own copy now. Go for it.
excellent, excellent.
Yeah, but that's neither here nor there today. But no, what I want to talk about obviously is the Millennial Kingdom, the Little Season,
Yeah,
and your take on it. Because what I understand is you have a bit of a more of a learned, shall we say, historically accurate based view on the timeline of things. Because you're not a historical
yeah.
revisionist like a lot of people who were in this movement are. I don't think you, from what I gathered, you only think maybe we're 200 years out with our time, maybe a bit of a manipulation here or there, perhaps. But roughly speaking, the timeline we have, historically speaking, is the correct one. What we know of human history is human history. So
Yeah.
am I right on saying that? And what I want you to do today, roughly, is just give your take on all of this. And I know
Okay.
it's a big ask because it has a broad question, but
Yeah.
I
No,
wouldn't know where to start, so I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm going to let you
that's
tell
great.
your side.
That's just fine. And I did do quite a bit of research on this week to get ready. I've never really, now that I think about it, I've never addressed the Millennium specifically. I haven't done a video focused just on that. So this was a good opportunity to me to bring some notes together and really go through some of it. So I have a good bit of material that I can share today. But I think back to your point about you kind of summarized a little bit where I stand, and I think you kind of nailed it on the head for now. And I say that because, I'm learning just like everybody else. I don't have all the answers, of course. I don't think any of us really do. But what I have done, and you mentioned kind of an evidence-based approach. I'm very structured that way in the way I approach my research. So when I start research, I'm really looking for as close to a direct source of information as I can get. And that means I'm studying literature of the past, right? And so, of course, with my Bible study, that means I've studied the Bible numerous times and I've gone into all these other writings. I've gone into, Enoch, all the pseudepigraphal works. I've done the Dead Sea Scrolls. I've read many of the church fathers. In fact, just this last week, I was going over some of them again for this. But so that's my focus is like I'm not going to come at it, and for me, I don't put a lot of value in bringing a lot of speculation into a video for research video. I want to really show you what I found, and so I do approach things that way.
Mhm.
And so with the Millennium, I've done the same thing, and that's kind of just how I've come at it.
Hmm.
So
No,
yeah,
absolutely.
you kind of nailed it on the head. And I think at the current time, like you said, I do feel that there is some sketchiness in our chronology, and I kind of feel like we're at about 200 to 300 years off.
Hmm.
And that's based on a lot of factors we can talk about if you'd like. But yeah, that's kind of where I sit right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, treat me like I'm just an absolute idiot today, because I'm going to admit I don't know everything about all the books you've clearly read. I've been to your website and you do have you have been working on an app which has just
Yeah.
books upon books upon books of biblical text from all over the place compiled into one a place where people can find them all and read them all. So you are trying to build a decent body of resources for people to
Yeah.
study these things themselves. And I want to learn today. Tell me what did the church fathers say? Tell me these things and tell my audience these things. What is out there in terms of the raw information documents? Because it's no secret, my channel is a speculation channel more than anything. Like
Yeah.
I
And
know a thing or two, but primarily I like to go into
well,
the realms of, well,
yeah,
if that, then what about this? And that's kind of what I like to roll with. But I like to get people
I
like
get
you
it.
on to just tell me, okay, well, what are the facts? What do we know exactly? So
Well, and there's
take it away.
nothing, don't get me wrong, there's nothing absolutely at all wrong with speculating. I'm just, I think for me, part of the current time period we're in, and the just, I have a insatiable desire to kind of read these things and learn for myself, right? And I think everybody's kind of feeling that. We're all doing this. We're trying to learn in our own way and wrestle with these things. So that's what I've done. But yeah, um, I've got all of this, so I think I can start going through some of it and really give you the lowdown on where I come to with the millennial ideas. And we're going to start in texts, in the scriptures, and in other texts. So to start with, I just like to kind of level the playing field and help people think about this. When we talk about the word millennium, you must be honest with yourself that this just doesn't exist in the Bible. There's no millennium in the Bible. There's no word millennium. So you can't go to a passage that says, well, the millennium is this or the millennium is that. So what we're doing is we're trying to, when we go to the Bible, we're trying to interpret out an idea of the millennium and then, figure it with our knowledge of history or this or that and put it all together like a puzzle.
Mm.
And that can sometimes be a little it can cause us to go down bad roads, and get to the wrong conclusions. So we do have to be careful. So I just wanted to draw people's attention to the fact that the Bible's not real specific on a millennium. For instance, the concept of a millennial reign. We see very little about a reign for 1,000 years in the Bible. Okay, now people are probably already thinking of Revelation chapter 20, which says that he laid hold of the dragon, the serpent, in verse 2, and he bound Satan 1,000 years, right? So there's 1,000 years, obviously. And then in chapter 20, verse 4, he says, I saw thrones, they sat upon them, judgment was given to them. And these are the saints that were brought to heaven with him. I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for their witness of Jesus, etc. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. Now, that doesn't limit Christ's reign to 1,000 years, but it does say that they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. And it seems to be congruent with this 1,000 years where Satan is bound, right?
Hmm.
And so in verse 7, he says, when the 1,000 years were expired, Satan would be loosed out of his prison. And so this is the millennium. This is all we've really got. Now, that's not to discount all the prophecies. There's prophecies in the Old Testament and all through the Bible about Christ's reign or the kingdom of God. And so that's where we have to go to next, is we have to learn more about the kingdom and how does that match up with this 1,000 years of the binding of Satan.
Hmm.
Okay. And so I think we just, again, I'll reiterate it before we move on, but we, in our modern Christianity, we take this idea of millennium, we capitalize the M, we think of all these different things that we pack into that idea. Whereas we can't really find a place in the Bible or in these writings that just packages that all together the way we do it,
Hmm.
right? And we all, I think a lot of people that are listening right now, they are from a background where they know there's this futurist eschatology that most Christians have shared for a long time, where Jesus comes back, there's antichrists, and there's tribulations, and there's all this stuff in our future, which I don't any longer believe that, and many of us have refined that understanding. But that's really where our concept of the millennium comes from, is that doctrine and that mentality, that dispensational eschatology.
Mm.
So just so everyone's aware of that. Now we'll move on. So what I did then was I tried to look through all these writings, like you mentioned, that I study for the 1,000-year time period, because that's key, right? If this is the millennium, I want to find this 1,000-year time period. So in the what we call the second book of Enoch, it's called the Secrets of Enoch. It
Hmm.
says this, says that God says he appointed the eighth day also, that the eighth day should be first created after my work, and that the first seven revolve in the form of 7,000. Now it's talking about years. And at the beginning of the 8,000 years, there would be a time of not counting, endless, with neither years, nor months, nor weeks, nor days, nor hours.
Mm.
So this is an interesting passage that's very specific and literal about Earth's history, expecting a 7,000 years of materialistic, uh, flesh and bone, dirt and water type history. And then it says on the 8,000 years, it would be spiritual. It would no longer be physical.
Mm.
Okay. And so I'm just showing this to show that a lot of ancient prophecies, this is in Enoch. We've got another one coming up, one or two that they're very old. They're like Genesis old. And these prophecies talk about prophetic things in terms of thousands year periods.
Mm.
And so we have to understand that prophecy is kind of filled with these 1,000-year periods. And so the 1,000 years of the binding of Satan is one of these types of periods. It's very common in this type of prophecy. So moving forward, we have verses in the Bible, as well as like this one in the book of Sirach, where it says, the number of a man's days are at most 100 years, as a drop of water in the sea, and a gravel stone in comparison of the sand, so are 1,000 years to the days of eternity.
Mm.
So we have verses like this in Second Peter and in other books that compare a day to 1,000 years. So just realize that in prophecy, there's a lot of places where the prophecy is given in days, but it means 1,000 years, just like I read you in Enoch there.
Yeah.
So moving through some of these, let's see, I don't need to read all of these, I don't think. There is a prophecy out of the book of Adam and Eve where God is telling Adam right after he has sinned and he's fallen short of God's command to not eat of the tree. God says to him, don't worry, Adam, I'm going to redeem mankind in 5,500 years.
Mm-hmm.
So he tells him essentially that Jesus would be coming in 5,500 years from when Adam sinned. And the interesting thing is we have early church fathers that said that's exactly what happened. And they said right after Jesus came, well, we're in the year 50 or 5,600 and something. And so we know that, it was right. All the prophecies were right. And if we look at the Septuagint, we see that the timelines given in the Septuagint match that 5,500 years perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not in all of our texts, but it is found in the Septuagint. So the Masoretic text is the basis for most of our Bibles, by the way, and that was actually built by what I would consider Pharisaical Jews in the Middle Ages. And you might actually call them Kabbalists, but I won't call them that on the air.
I've heard that one before. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's all this, and these things are confirmed, these 1,000-year ideas of prophecy. So let's move on to where it talks about the kingdom, because that's, of course, critical to the millennial kingdom, right? What is the kingdom? In Psalms chapter 2, it says, I have set my king on the holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, thou art my son, and this day I have begotten thee. And then in verse 12, he says, kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and ye perish from the way when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are they that put their trust in him. So this is David, thousands of years before Christ. Well, a couple thousand maybe. saying Christ is going to be sitting on the throne. And so this is part of the kingdom prophecies that we see. In Psalm 146, he says, "The Lord shall reign forever, even thy God, O Zion." Now, that is a loaded statement. We have to understand what's being said when we go to the scriptures. It says the Lord is the word in Hebrew, Yahweh. Okay, so that's God the Father. But he says, even thy God. Now that is even thy Elohim, and he's talking about Jesus Christ. So God's Elohim, Christ, is going to reign unto all generations, it says in Psalm 146, verse 10. So now we've got Christ is going to reign, and we've also got he's going to reign for all time. Forever after he comes, he will reign. So when we keep going through the prophecies of the kingdom, we get Isaiah 45 saying that the kingdom will be, the way the English translates it translates it as everlasting, an everlasting kingdom. But in the Hebrew, it's really a continuous, long-lasting kingdom is kind of the actual literal translation. But again, it's the idea that it just keeps going. Then we come to like even the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have, of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls are this collection of writings that were prior to Christ, some by 100 years, some by 500 years, some by more than they even know. Like we can't really estimate when they were actually written. But part of those writings say that God will glorify the pious on the throne of the eternal kingdom. Now it's talking about the poor people. So it says, over the poor, his spirit will hover and renew the faithful with his power and glorify them on the throne of the eternal kingdom. Of course, in the New Testament, we just read in Revelation that the saints would reign on thrones with him, okay, for that 1,000 years. So now things start to match up. When we start putting all this stuff together, it does start to match. We start to see a picture. We have the seminal passage that is the messianic prophecy in Isaiah chapter 9, and most of you will recognize it when I say, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, the government will be on his shoulders, his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace." Now, and then it says, of course, the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end, okay, on the throne of David. So again, it's an everlasting kingdom. And so again, it's just reaffirming every time. It sounds like the kingdom is everlasting. Now, this 1,000-year period, you'll notice in all of these prophecies, we still haven't heard of a limit to the kingdom or the reign, right?
Right.
So that's the interesting thing as I really studied hard into this and got deep with it, is that I felt like every time I was seeing this, it was the 1,000 years was for the binding of Satan, but the millennial reign lasted forever, okay, from the time of Christ. So I just want to make that point. And there's really not much prophecy in the Old Testament, none that I could find, that combines the two things and says, yes, the millennial reign for the 1,000 years. So that kind of goes through some of those prophecies. I didn't even scratch the surface really, but just to give you that idea. Now, what I wanted to do real quickly is kind of hit the idea of what the Jews might have thought about this stuff. And before I go into any of this, do you have any questions, Paul, or any things you want to ask or say?
Well, the way you're talking here, it sounds like the 1,000 years specifically was just a description of a time where Satan was no longer influencing mankind. From the sounds of it, he was bound for 1,000 years, which would be the first time in human history where that was the case for humanity since the beginning of time, since Eden itself. And I think I find it fascinating to imagine it from that viewpoint. Maybe it wasn't necessarily that Christ was physically ruling on earth for 1,000 years, but it was just a time period where humanity was unencumbered by the influence of the accuser from guilt and shame, and was capable of building something so beautiful and wonderful. Because we still have to explain these buildings, first of all, and everything else, So this comes in as quite and I'm not saying Christ wasn't ruling from his kingdom in heaven, but it's possible perhaps his resurrected saints may have been physically ruling. I don't know if you are possibly for that, or were they ruling with him in heaven and the influence trickled down into the physical realm perhaps or something. Would you stand with something that kind of concept? This is just a few initial thoughts I'm coming at here.
And I want to get to that stuff too. I definitely want all that. Yes, I want to talk about the buildings a little bit and the the different dates problems we've seen and ideas on that stuff. There's just a few things. We'll hit that towards the end, but
Sure.
if you don't mind, let me go in quickly here to I wanted to hear, like, what did the Jews think about this? I usually do this as part of my research. It's like, what does the Midrash say, the rabbinical writings? What ideas did they have on the millennial kingdom, the reign of the Messiah? So that's where I went next. I found in the Talmud that in the Sanhedrin 98a it says that kings shall see and arise, princes shall prostrate themselves because of the Lord who is faithful, the Holy One of Israel, who has chosen you, indicating, it says, that redemption will come independent of repentance. So they're arguing over it. Okay, now a lot of the rabbinical writings are rabbis arguing, so you got to kind of realize that. And then in verse 7 of that, it says, Rabbi Hama bar Hanina says, the son of David will not come until the contemptuous kingdom of Rome will cease from the Jewish people, as it is stated, and he shall sever the spirits with pruning hooks. So this is an interesting statement. I'm not sure this is completely applicable to the reign of Messiah, but it says they're arguing over when it's going to start. And I did think it was interesting they brought Rome into the picture here.
Mm.
Sanhedrin 97a says this. Rav Katina says 6,000 years is the duration of the world, and it is in ruins for 1,000 years. The duration of the period during which the world is in ruins is derived from a verse, and it states that verse. But then it says, the day of God lasts 1,000 years. And then it says a different rabbi, Abaye, says it is in ruins for 2,000 years. And so they're arguing again, back and forth. There's another section. It says the school of Eliyahu taught that 6,000 years was the duration of the world. 2,000 of that 6,000 was characterized by chaos. And then 2,000 were characterized by Torah. And 2,000 were the period of the Messiah. So I'll tell you honestly, without going through all of these references in the Talmud and the Midrash, because they all say slightly different things. And that's the thing that I came away from this, being kind of surprised by, was that it seems like the Jews didn't know how long the reign of Christ was going to be, not by the sources that I found. And I found multiple sources in the Midrash and the Talmud both, where it was talking about how their ideas fluctuated. There was one or two that said it was 1,000 years for Christ, the Messiah's reign. There were others that were like, it's 2,000. There were some that, they just dodged the question kind of.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that I didn't get any clarity really when I went to these Jewish sources. So I just thought I'd bring that to the table so people are aware of that.
These Jewish sources, sorry, my ignorance, are they post or pre-Christ, these sources?
These are mostly post-Christ.
Okay,
I will say that.
So it would be in their interest to try and weasel their way out of accepting Christ and trying to change maybe the narratives or the text that they
absolutely
have. So we have to bear that in mind. Yeah. So there is that angle as well, that they wouldn't necessarily want it to have been the Messiah that they crucified. So maybe they're trying to figure. They're arguing.
Obscure.
Yeah. They're arguing to try and figure out a way out of it. So he's not the Messiah, basically, aren't they? Just again, some initial thoughts. But go ahead. Don't let me derail your thought. Carry on.
No, not at all. And by the way, just to reinforce that idea, I have found a couple different early church fathers that wrote that the Jews, after the time Christ had come, that they were changing their Hebrew texts to obscure that fact. Just like you said, they didn't want people to think that he was actually the Messiah. But all right. So then going forward, there's some interesting things. I've got a ton of information. I'm going to kind of skip through some of this. Let's see. I'm just trying to scan to see what is going to be really pertinent. I think what I want to do is go down to the New Testament, because what we see in the New Testament is very interesting. I'll start, though, with some other writings outside the Bible, because we come from such a Christian background so often that we kind of like, oh, yeah, the Bible says that. And we try to re-explain the Bible. We're really apt to do that, right? But when we hear it, it's like, oh, another source said that too? So that's kind of why I'm going to go to these early church fathers. For instance, in Justin Martyr's writings, he says this. He says, and Justin of Neapolis, which is actually Naples, Italy, a man who was not far separated from the apostles either in age or excellence, and that the flesh indeed dies, but the kingdom of heaven lives. Says that which is mortal is inherited, but which is immortal inherits. So I know this sounds like it's off topic, but really what he's saying is the kingdom is immortal. Like you have to be immortal to be a part of it. Okay. He's saying flesh dies, but the kingdom lives.
Mm-hmm.
That which is mortal is inherited, but that which is immortal inherits the kingdom, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So just be aware, this is what the early church fathers were talking about after 70 AD. This is after the temple's destroyed. As Revelation 20 would put it, they're in heaven. Christ
Mm-hmm.
would be at the throne of the Father. The saints should be reigning with him, as it says in those verses we read. And now we have early church fathers talking about that very thing.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have Clement of Rome, who says in his, he writes an epistle on virginity, actually. I don't know if that sounds strange to your audience, but virginity was a very coveted attribute in this time period, right? So he wrote an actual letter to the churches about virginity so they would understand what it means and how important it is. So Clement of Rome writes this. He says, of all virgins of either sex, man or woman, who have truly resolved to preserve virginity for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, of each and every one of them, it is required that they be worthy of the kingdom of heaven in everything. For not by eloquence or renown, or station, or beauty, or strength is the kingdom of heaven obtained, but it's obtained by the power of faith, when a man exhibits the works of faith. So what he's telling these people that were so keen on being virgins for the kingdom, he's saying, it's okay, it's great to be a virgin, but you also got to be faithful and do good things, right? You got to walk the walk. Don't just talk the talk.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting, though, as you saw me, I stated it and read it out. He calls it the kingdom of heaven. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Kingdom of heaven. And now this is Clement. Clement was actually very early. So this is probably written prior to Christ's coming in 70 AD. Okay, so I would imagine Clement probably wrote in the 50s if I had to pin it.
Okay.
But then we have some other writings, very, very interesting. In an apocryphal writing called the Second Apocalypse of John, it says this: whoever shall not worship the beast shall be called a witness in the kingdom of heaven and shall inherit eternal life with my holy ones. Okay, so again, just a reference to the kingdom of heaven. In the book of Enoch, chapter 62, it says this: the Lord of spirits will abide over them. It's talking about the righteous. And with that, the Son of Man, they shall eat and lie down and rise up forever and ever. It's talking about the kingdom here. And the righteous and elect shall have risen from the earth and ceased to be of downcast countenance. They shall have been clothed with garments of glory. Okay, so this is all heavenly talk. This is the white garments in Revelation that the saints were clothed with before they were taken to heaven. Okay, as they were taken to heaven, rather. In fact, there's other writings by Isaiah that say that he had a vision and was taken to heaven, and he saw the garments that would be put on the saints when they rose. So this is all stuff that's known, and it's all heavenly talk and heavenly based. So I have a lot of those, but I want to mention then that if we just take the Bible itself and we just go to the New Testament, I don't know why it is that Matthew seems to use this phrase where other of the Gospels don't, but Matthew specifically uses the phrase kingdom of heaven, and he uses it 32 different times when he's describing things in the parables and all this other stuff. He says things like the kingdom of heaven will be like a mustard seed. All these different parables, they're all based on an idea of the kingdom of heaven. Now, some of the other Gospels call that the kingdom of God, granted, but it seems to be that if we take the emphasis, it seems to be on a heavenly type of kingdom. Mm-hmm. In Acts chapter 2, and this is the last one I'll do on this, Peter he has a sermon. This is just after Pentecost, and all these men from different nations have come into Jerusalem for Pentecost. And then God makes the Holy Spirit come upon the apostles. They speak in tongues. And then Peter preaches what I think is one of the most important sermons ever preached. He preaches to these men these Jews from all over, essentially. He says, This Jesus has God raised up, whereof we're all witnesses. Therefore, being by the right hand of God exalted, and having received of the Father the promise of the Holy Ghost, he has shed forth this which we now see and hear. He means all these spectacular things. But he's saying Jesus is at the right hand of God. And he says, for David is not ascended into the heavens, but he says himself, the Lord said to my Lord, meaning Christ, sit on my right hand, sit at my right hand. Therefore, let all the house of Israel know assuredly that God has made the same Jesus that you crucified, both Lord and Christ. So his inference there is that Christ is at the right hand of the Father at that moment. That was after his ascension, and that he's reigning already in heaven on the throne of David. Okay, so a lot of people that look for an earthly throne or earthly kingdom, even in the future, they'll say, well, the throne of David will somehow be rebuilt, right? He'll sit on it at some point in Jerusalem or something like that. But this verse seems to speak against that, and so do these other references to the kingdom of heaven. So I'll pause there because what I'll go into next is some of the early church fathers talking about the kingdom, the ones after Christ. But do you have any questions at this point you want me to talk about?
No, not so far. No, it's all making sense. So it's the idea.
Okay.
It's the idea that it's not a physical kingdom on earth exactly. It's that Christ is in heaven with the Father, with the saints that were resurrected, and then I'm guessing you're going to go into now how that manifested on earth in some way, shape, or form, which we could equate to something akin to a time when the devil's locked away for 1,000 years, along with this process. So I'm getting the narrative here. Let's keep let's keep rolling. Let's go.
I'm just trying to paint the picture real clearly. So, I'm not just going through all this stuff and then you're like, well, he just said that, but I don't believe it. So, I'm trying to show you, but you're totally right. I think this is pointing to an intention of a heavenly kingdom. And, I've said to people in the past on different videos and stuff I've done before that, this is probably, in my opinion, what the Jews didn't like. The Jews were really upset. The Zealots were trying to start war with Rome because they wanted Christ to immediately take Rome out. They wanted to fight. They wanted all these things to happen, and Christ just didn't do it that way. I think the fact that Christ's kingdom was heavenly was what made them so upset about it. If Christ had set up shop and then built an army of Jews and then gone through and conquered Romans at the time, that might have satisfied those Jewish zealots. But instead, they got more agitated, more extreme. And in fact, most of the Jews in general joined with that idea and just hated Christ. They ended up killing him. So that kind of fits in. It kind of makes sense when you put all those pieces together. But what I'll talk about now a little bit here is what people who would have been in this kingdom, Christians, were saying about the kingdom at that time. So I start with Polycarp. Polycarp was alive from 69 AD to 155 AD. So he probably wrote these things at about 100, 120, that time frame. In his epistle to the Philippians, in chapter 5, he says this. He says, in like manner, deacons should be blameless in the presence of his righteousness, as deacons of God and Christ, and not of men, not calumniators, not double-tongued, not lovers of money, not all these things, but walking according to the truth of the Lord, who became a minister of all. For if we be well-pleasing unto him in this present world, we shall receive the future world also, according as he promised us to raise us from the dead, that if we conduct ourselves worthy of him, we shall also reign with him, if indeed we have faith. So there's Polycarp. He probably wrote this 50 to 60 years after 70 AD. And he's saying, look, we've got to do the things. We've got to act in truth, righteousness, in accordance with what Christ taught us, because we want to be a part of that kingdom. And he talks as if it's there and we're going to reign with him, right? So, that's one of those things. Then we can move forward in history a little bit. We'll go to Tertullian, and this is about 200 AD that he writes this. He writes this in his writing called Against Praxeas. He says this, but it remains so firm and stable in its own state, notwithstanding the introduction into it of the threeness Now he's talking about the Godhead, and a lot of Trinitarians use this as a doctrine of Trinity, but I'll just read through it, and that's not what we're here for. But he says that the Son actually has to restore the kingdom entirely to the Father, even as the apostle says in his epistle concerning the very end of all, when he shall have delivered up the kingdom to God. Now that's in 1 Corinthians that he's referencing there. For he must reign, it says, until he has put all enemies under his feet. Following, of course, the words of the psalmist, sit on my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. Now that's exactly what Peter said about David's writing in Psalms. So he says, when, however, all things shall be subdued to him, then shall the Son also himself be subject to the Father, that God may be all in all. So anyway, long story to say, he also is talking about the kingdom as if it's in progress at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, reigning in heaven, he reemphasizes the verse that David said about him reigning by his Father in heaven. So that, again, it feels like the inference here is definitely heavenly.
Mm-hmm.
We can move forward again a hundred years or so to Eusebius in 328 AD. In his Church History, Book 1, Chapter 2, he says this. He says, for instance, Daniel the prophet, under the influence of the divine spirit, seeing his kingdom at the end of time, was inspired thus to describe the divine vision in language fitted to our comprehension. And he quotes, he says, for I beheld until thrones were placed and the Ancient of Days did sit. He says, he quotes this whole thing. He mentions the thousands that ministered to him, and he appointed judgment and the books were opened. And he says again, I saw one like the Son of Man came in the clouds of heaven and hastened to the Ancient of Days. He quotes this entire verse. He says, his dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom will not be destroyed. It's the dominion and glory of the kingdom. All peoples, tribes, and tongues will serve him at some point. And he says, Eusebius says, it's clear from these words that we can refer to no one else than to Christ our Savior, the Word of God, who was in the beginning with God, was called the Son of Man because of his final appearance in the flesh. So again, all the references here just to the kingdom in action is pretty apparent by these guys. You would expect, so let's just think about for a second, if the kingdom was physical, it was essentially like Christ was on earth somewhere, and he was over in, I don't know where he would be. Maybe he would be in Palestine. Let's say he was in Jerusalem on the throne. I think that these writings would look totally different. They would just be absolutely different and littered with, we have now sojourned and seen our Christ, the one who died for us, et cetera, et cetera. All those things that would have been said about an earthly kingdom just are not said. Mm-hmm. When instead we seem to have this reference to the heavenly and living well on earth so they can then experience that and reign with Christ. Mm-hmm. So again, I go through a bunch there, but I think we'll finish that. But it seems to be pretty obvious from the things that I've gone through to me that these early Christians, they really felt like it was about that. It was about the heavenly kingdom they wanted to be a part of so badly. And that's why they were ministering to people. That's why they were going to all these nations. And I mean, the gospel spread like absolute wildfire at this time. They're going all over. I mean, throughout Europe, I've done a lot of historical study on Europe over essentially the first 1,000 years after Christ. And Christianity just took over all these pagan nations. I mean, from the Germanics to the Saxons to the Franks and the Berbers and everybody, all around the Mediterranean basin. It's just unbelievable what happened. I feel it's absolutely miraculous. It's one of the things we kind of overlook because we hear all the what I feel is Holy Roman history. And they don't really emphasize that, because that was outside the control of the Roman Church. But it's very interesting, the amazing spread and these ministers of the faith going out and telling them, look, Christ came. He's the one. He's reigning by the Father. They all gave this same message. He's reigning at the right hand of the Father, and you need to turn to him, and we all need to live worthily of that kingdom, right? So
Hmm.
I'll pause there again, but I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, no, so far so good. I'm just imagining here. So we're going how to what point do we then incorporate? Let's say was it 536 was recorded as the worst year on history? I think have you heard this one
Yeah,
before? Where it was quite literally an apocalyptic event by any description of any historical
right.
standards, And I'm just wondering, just playing devil's advocate, I suppose, but could it be that the early church fathers perhaps had not yet experienced the coming of Christ and tribulation yet? Do you know what I mean? And they perhaps would have that worldview is all heavenly because they hadn't yet come upon them as in a physical sense, like they thought it was going to be. Then enter the dark ages, shall we say, so called,
Yeah, yeah.
And that's just one thing I've thought of there, which obviously you can come back with whatever you want. I'm not saying that is true, or
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm just trying to incorporate these historical moments in my own mind and how we could square to it being possibly a physical kingdom or then a
yeah.
spiritual one. But also, I'm just wondering, you were saying there, Christendom just spread everywhere.
Oh, yeah,
Pagans
absolutely.
converting just en masse, and that
Yeah,
to me sounds like something that would start to happen when the old gods suddenly had no power anymore, when Satan was bound for 1,000 years. Suddenly, these gods are
yeah,
silent. Satan and his legions are no longer influencing man in any way, shape, or form. These
yeah.
idols that may have once talked to these people, these pagans, are no longer talking. It could be a good reason as to why people were suddenly converting to something that actually was real and tangible. And these people, obviously, talking about the heavenly kingdom of Christ has come. The old gods are dead. They've been defeated.
Yeah.
It's done. Satan's bound for 1,000 years. So I was just imagining that in my mind as a good reason as to why it would spread so vehemently and quickly. So let's just get just some thoughts in my mind. I'll give them all back to you. Keep going.
No, it's
Keep going.
great. Absolutely. So what you're talking about is I think key. And so what I did, I actually studied that time period, all the things you're talking about, 536, the quote volcanic winter that they talk about.
Hmm.
Um, and I actually put together a series called The Cataclysm of Rome. It's a 4-part series on my channel that is, out there. It's available for anyone to watch. It's it turned into an incredible series, but I go through a lot of that. And what I truly believe, Paul, after all this study and research of this time period, like you said, that Christianity spread like that. It was incredible. But what you see too, and you may or may not know this, you see all these different groups of people. They're called the barbarian hordes, right? They
Mm-hmm.
came in and they invaded Rome, right? What's very interesting about all these, quote, barbarian tribes is that almost without fail, every single one of them was Christian.
Mm.
And it's not mentioned much in the histories because that makes the Catholic Church look really bad. It makes the Roman Catholic Church look really bad. Uh, Now, there were some, like the Huns and some of the Far Eastern groups of people that were probably still pagan. But the majority of the peoples of Europe had converted, and they were not Roman Catholic, they were apostolic Christian. And so it's interesting that we look over the next 500 years after Christ, and what do we see? We see that huge spread of Christianity, and then we see people coming along in the 300s disagreeing with the Roman Church about the ideas of the Godhead, like at the Council of Nicaea
Mm-hmm.
with the Trinity doctrine that came in so hot and heavy. Well, that came out of the Roman Church.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we see is all these Christian nations from around Europe, one by one, start attacking Rome. And of course, that's portrayed to us in history as, well, they were, uncivilized barbarians, right? That's what we're taught. But the truth may be something really different. So I would encourage anyone that's interested in what we're talking about right now to maybe check my channel out. There's a ton behind this, that you can see once you pull the covers back. And I have it in that series. It's called The Cataclysm of Rome. But I
Mm-hmm.
won't plug that anymore. So,
No, plug
but
away. Plug away. Go for it. That's fine.
no, so it's good stuff, all good. And I do think that what you're saying too is where I came to on this was that I think that the reign occurred and it was heavenly. Christ was in heaven reigning. And like you said, what does that make available to the people of earth, to Christianity in general? Well, it's able to spread all over the place. What we also see in the first few centuries after Christ is that the kingdom of Rome, which of course in many ways is related to Babylon, ancient Babylon,
Hmm.
the kingdom of Rome was hit by every plague and every disaster you can think of. I mean, so many that for a country that's the size of Nevada, you would you would never, I mean, it's just unbelievable to think how many earthquakes, pestilences, they had times of plague where thousands of Romans were dying every day
Hmm.
in say the second and third century. Just all these events that when you see them from a bird's eye view and realize all these things that happen, you're like, well, maybe if there was a heavenly kingdom, then this is what God would do to overcome the nations, right? Essentially overcome Babylon, which was the big bad nation from back in the day, right? And
Hmm.
then I've even found writings that from authors in this time period that say that the gods of ancient Babylon were the gods of Rome. They had just come straight over. There was no difference. And so, you just start to paint this interesting picture of, well, what is the kingdom? What was this reign? And what did God do? What did Christ do from heaven with that time period? It may have been more spectacular than any of us ever thought. And then, of course, we do see. You mentioned earlier the buildings, and I am not in any way. I would never deny those buildings are incredible. I mean, absolutely spectacular.
Hmm.
But I think that my ideas on that has kind of shifted to this. Well, this is what man can do when he is freed from the shackles of a world dominating power like Babylon, like Rome, like the city of London. Who knows? I
Hmm.
mean, all these different ideas, what happens when we're free to live under the rule of Christ?
Hmm.
When we aren't building buildings that are based on a profit margin and a capitalistic society wherein which we have to exist, right? So there's a reason why all our buildings right now are boxes. It's because they fit together quick and easy and fast, and we make lots of money on them, right?
Hmm.
We don't make lots of money when we go build Notre Dame, okay? That's a waste of money. I mean, you lose money when you do that. But in those days, it was about building for the kingdom, building for God, and they had the freedom to do it.
Hmm.
And the skills, to be honest, we've lost a lot of those skills, So while I do think there's spectacular things in our past, I think that I truly think that humanity can get back to that.
Hmm.
But I don't think it takes a reign of Christ for us to get there. I think it just takes us exercising our God-given abilities and talents in a way that's not bound by like control mechanisms and bankers and capitalism and all this other stuff. So that's kind of my ideas on the building aspect of this.
Hmm.
I know there's tons of ideas out there, and I don't mean to shatter anyone's ideas on that, but I just think that this makes sense to me. And I will say this, like, I just do not feel, based on the evidence, that I've found enough any really writing that's directly regarding a physical reign.
Hmm.
I can't find it. So if I was shown that, I would definitely pick up that mantle and research it and run with it, right? But
Hmm.
I just can't find that. What I can find is this amazing time period after Christ came where the whole world changed, right?
Hmm.
And then what they call the Dark Ages, I don't believe was dark at all. It was the Christian ages.
Hmm.
And it was Rome trying to regain its footing after it had been totally decimated over the first few centuries after Christ.
Hmm.
And so when we come out of the Dark Ages, what do we hear? We hear, it's the rebirth. Well, this is all Roman speak. This is Roman Catholic speak. It's the rebirth, it's the Enlightenment. And we have to ask ourselves, enlightenment from what? Well,
Hmm.
for them, it's we're getting out of Christianity. We're getting away from that Christianity stuff. we're getting into science, right?
Yeah.
So they start focusing on science and saying, well, if we can do an experiment that shows that what we say is right, then it trumps the Bible, right? Trumps God. So that's what we really see in history when we start digging and pulling the covers back, as far as I'm concerned. So
Yeah, no. I mean, that perspective is something I've also been on board with. I've always said that whether it was a physical or spiritual reign, and obviously the arguments are that it is an eternal kingdom in heaven. It never ends once it's established. And
yeah,
like you
yeah,
said, your description, understanding that, but it does say there's 1,000 years where the devil isn't around anymore.
true.
Imagine what you could do with that time, what humanity could do without that unencumbered hindrance on their creativity and
Yeah.
the trust man would have one another, because no one's whispering in their ears anymore to covet and to fight and to all these type of things. It would be a time of relative peace, unseen, unheard in all of human history, with Christ reigning and everyone knowing that and believing that and having faith in that as well, working towards establishing their own right to the kingdom. Then the world
Yeah.
would start to look like an incredibly beautiful, well built out place full of Gothic style architectural, just beautiful sound, cymatic based, frequency based, creation based buildings, And people argue it's like, well, why would Christ build buildings? And it says, well, no, Christ probably doesn't need a building, but people do. People need roofs over their heads.
Well,
People,
and I'm going to add to something you just said, and I think that people need to understand this because it's this is why it's so hard. It's so hard to grab all this because it's so big, right? It's so
mm-hmm,
big. But what you just talked about, where we imagine a world where we are free to create and to be and to exist, we aren't encumbered by all these control mechanisms. I truly believe that, and this is going to touch some things that I know a lot of your guys on your channel will be like, oh yeah. When we talk about the things that were happening around the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th, so we're talking about the time where the World's Fairs were in full swing.
yeah,
The industrial age was starting to get itself together and become a thing, and the ingenuity of man was at an all-time, like, people were just writing books about how great it's going to be. We've now found, how to build steam engines. We can get food to all the peoples of Earth. We can solve world hunger. I've read those writings. I've read books from that time period. They say these things. I believe that what was happening at the end of the 19th century was exactly that. People were starting to realize and come back to it. We were starting to get there again.
mm-hmm,
And people were so excited about the ingenuity of man. That's why they were doing World's Fairs. They were trying to show off. We can do this. We can do this. Look at this. And that's about the time I think that the people that didn't want that to happen tried to stamp it back out. So what do we have happen in the next few years after this? We have the industrial age start full swing. That's a little bit of a control mechanism, tactic to control the way technology goes. Then what we also have is the Depression, the world wars, okay? All these different things. We also have the rise of dispensational theology, which came out of the Schofield Bible,
mm-hmm,
which was funded by those same bankers, control groups, right?
mm-hmm.
So what we have, I believe, is that we had a resurgence at the end of the 1800s. And then as humanity was about to take off, the control freaks of the world said, no, 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 we can't let that happen because we can't control that. And I think during the first half of the 20th century, the 1900s, early 1900s, they worked their best to stamp that out. And I think that's what manifests itself in communism and Bolshevism.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that that's a lot I just laid out, but it's something that, you can take and you can think on, people can work on their own. But I do believe we were trying as a race, a human race, to get back to some of that awesomeness, if you will. And
Well,
we were just thwarted by
absolutely,
these
absolutely.
bankers.
I'm no stranger to the 20th century collectivist ideologies that basically destroyed everything.
Yeah.
I've kind of made videos about it myself in the past, and it's a true. Obviously, I think a lot of people have this misconception about Christianity that it turns you into like a member of the Borg or something, like a hive mind drone who doesn't think for themselves. And it's kind of, that's actually not at all what Christ is calling you to be. He's calling you to be your true 100% best self that God created you to be. and God has that for you if you so choose to take the life. He can have everything you ever want. He's got it mapped out for you. He knows you. You know, he created you lovingly and fearfully, made you who you are, and it's kind of up to it's our journey to get back on that path. But we have the freedom to not. That's the joy of
Oh
having
yeah.
free will, you know. But
Yeah.
if we were to so align ourselves with God's will, we'd realize we'd have everything we ever wanted. It's kind of that's, and I think a lot of people think, well, I'm not giving up my freedoms and my free will and who I am and my personality to become a part of this hive mind Christendom. It's like that's not what Christianity is meant to be. We're not supposed to be some hive mind weirdness. But the irony is, obviously, these collectivist ideologies like communism that came out at the latter end of the 20th century, it's kind of that's exactly what it is. It's taking away your individualism. It's taking away that idea that you are now one with this hive mind. It's what they claim Christianity is, while being the actual thing that's destroying everything, you know. And it's kind of it's
Well,
sad in a way, but I think
yeah.
that what you're describing there is quite interesting. That we had a time, 1,000 years of prosperity, a true enlightenment period, not a dark age, should we say? Then coming out of the, so are you assuming when the Dark Ages ended and the Enlightenment began, and we went towards obviously a renaissance of science, shall we say? Are you indicating that's roughly the 1500s, 1600s is when the little season began? Is that what you're hinting at there? Then there was a point where we started to just basically lose all of that. But then 200,
Yeah.
300 years later, mankind starts going, wait a minute, we can build great things. Look at and then Satan said, nope, not yet. It's still my season, and just knocked us back down again. Is that what you're hinting at in terms of timelines here? Just
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I feel like it's around that time frame that Satan was loosed. Um,
mhm.
and yeah, so it's hard to pinpoint it. Now there's competing ideas on that. I just found it interesting that the channel There's No Place Like Home just recently did a short study video on John Fox's book called Acts and Monuments. And I don't remember the date of that. I think it's really old, like 1300s or something like that, where he says that the binding of Satan ended in about 1324, which is interesting. So that's about the time frame we're talking about. But it's just an interesting thought. So I guess what I'm saying is that, yeah, I think in that range somewhere is where we're talking about. And again, I do think there's a little sketchiness in the chronology around the 8th, 9th, 10th century. So that would have squished the idea of where we think of the millennium. It would have made that last out to like maybe 1200, 1300,
Mhm.
about like the time you said, the time of the Renaissance or
Yeah.
so.
So it's not
So
like so. Again, the timeline's a mess, and it's really hard to get a. I
it
know
is hard.
it's hard to just get a coherent thing. So what you're saying is we're actually in like the year 1700s now, technically
Yeah,
speaking.
that's what I feel like. I
Yeah.
feel like that's about right. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that one before, and obviously because it's quite arbitrarily, people say it was 1776 where the little season began. You know, because that's when America was established, and then obviously you have
Right.
the Lucifer statue with the chain broken on the ankle, the Statue of Liberty, you know, these type
Right.
of things, and that's the releasing of Satan for his little season. And it's kind of well, and then people go on then to say, so that means the little season ends in 250 years from that date, and it's kind of I get the logic. 1,000 years,
Yeah.
a season is a quarter, so a quarter of 1,000 years is 250. I get the reasoning, but that's so
Yeah.
arbitrary. That's an arbitrary number. We do not
Right.
know how long a little season is. It's never
Yeah. And
defined, you know.
let me throw this out too, because in regards to pinpointing dates like that,
Hmm.
it's tough because the more I learn prophecy from all these old writings that I've been reading, the more I read it, the more I realize that there's sometimes a little leeway given in the way it's stated. For instance, if you take the prophecy in Enoch, it's the prophecy of the 10 weeks. Some of you will be familiar with this. He gives this long prophecy, says in week 1, these things happen, in week 2. And it's really, he's going through all of history, right? He goes through the coming of Christ. He goes through all of it. He even goes out, it seems, into our future with this. But what happens in that is he's like, towards the end of the first week, this happens. And then in the middle of the second week, this happened. It's like all over the place. It's not like it's going to happen like, so structured,
Hmm.
So I've started to realize some of these prophecies don't have to be so rigid as we want to make them. So I just thought I'd throw that in there because there's basis for that where we're not really talking about, well, it's got to be a quarter of a century or a millennium, or it's got to be this or that.
Hmm.
A short season is literally a short season, some kind of shorter season than some other long season. We don't know, like you just said. It's
Hmm.
just tough to be real dogmatic about that.
Well, it's like if you want to go off the time span of the creation, what did you say there? 8,000 years, including the last 1,000 year of a heavenly moment. So 7,000 years of a physical kingdom, let's say. So what's a season by that standard? By
Right,
7,000,
right. A season,
yeah, exactly.
yeah, you got it.
You,
Exactly.
you can pick a random scale, and it's all relative, really, where you want to land a season out of that, a short time or a little time, you
Yeah.
know.
And
So,
we have to realize that John in Revelation, he probably wasn't trying to, or the angel who's giving him this, they weren't trying to give him dates for everything.
no.
I mean, this is after he had just prophesied and told John all about what was going to happen in the next 40 or so years with Christ and his coming and the judgment of Israel. And then he's going way off into the future and just saying, well, so you're aware these things will come. You know, he's not trying to be super specific there. We
Hmm.
shouldn't really expect that, right? So,
Well, John would have had no context to understand what they were talking about by that point.
right.
Um,
It's not really for them except to understand that he has a plan, right?
mhm,
So, yeah.
exactly. So, from what I'm gathering, is you are a little seasonist. Is that what we should call? Because you don't want to be called a preterist, and I get that because that's a
Uh,
formalized system created by a Jesuit in the 1600s, as everyone loves to tell me over and over again, continuously. And it's kind of yeah, well, I'm not a preterist either. I don't conform to that what that man said in the 1600s necessarily. It's kind of all I'm going
yeah.
off is the words of in the book, and it's pretty self evident that yeah, a lot of what was prophesied in Revelation happened pretty
Right.
quickly, and what
Yeah.
Christ was saying was pretty immediate in his language. That's why I believe it's already happened. Now, to the extent of what has happened, I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm still trying to figure out where we are in the time. And I have also landed on this seems like we're in the little season. This is not a time where man is
Yeah.
unencumbered by Satan. This is a time where
Right.
he is in full swing and his army and his minions are out there doing the thing, you know, and I'm sure
Yeah.
everyone is pretty that is evident. So
Yeah.
by that standard, I also know this isn't the new heaven and earth either. This is not it. Okay, so what's your view on this? What, do you think we're in the little season? Have you have any thoughts about what it is to be in the little season? Do you have any
Yeah.
ideas on what's to come next in this little season and how that will all pan out? You know, do you have a theory or ideas on how that's gonna,
Yeah.
how's it gonna
I
go? You
so
know.
I feel like we're definitely in the little season. I have no reason to believe anything other than that. Just the simple statements from Revelation. I think anyone who looks at it honestly and says, well, from the time Jesus was on earth, about 1,000 years out, that's way behind us now. It should be. So
Hmm.
it seems like we're in that season. We don't think Satan's been defeated because we see evil all over the place. And in fact, like you said, it seems to be pretty bad right now in general in terms of the control he may have in the world and the things that are being done. But also to me, it feels like he may be he may be cornered, and that's why it's so bad right now.
Hmm.
So I feel like my personal opinion is that we are towards the end of the little season, and I think that actually there's going to be a huge, amazing change on the earth in the short term in the next few years. That's a personal opinion. I don't have to really back that up with scripture, so I'll just leave it out there for anyone to hack it down if they want. But that's what I feel. I feel like people are, and that's part of why I think like you and I are doing this, and we're able to discuss things now we weren't ever able to discuss before. Christianity is kind of waking up, and I think God has a plan for that. I think that really is part of a plan. I
Hmm.
don't think that's just random. So I'm think we're right at the end of the little season, and that the next things on the list, according to Revelation, as we read earlier, sounds like the battle of Gog and Magog may occur, and then we're definitely looking at the getting rid of Satan, and then a final judgment, and then from everything I've read, we all as Christians get to be with God then, and it's going to be wonderful. So
Hmm.
I'm excited.
Absolutely.
Whereas, some people are out there fear mongering. While I realize that I'm saying some things are going to happen soon, I don't emphasize that as a part of my ministry. It's that's all good things to me. So
Hmm.
yeah,
So again, it's hard to know where to take this conversation now because any question I ask from now is not going to be a simple answer, and it will take up big chunks of time. So I need to be quite
Yeah.
selective and quick with how I'm going to do this. But in terms of Gog Magog war, so obviously let's be excited for what comes after this: new heaven and earth. Finally, with the kingdom manifest as it should be. Now, do you imagine that to be a big dramatic thing, where a lot of destruction and fear and armies gathered and marching north, all these type of things, and then fire coming down from heaven in a literal sense, just destroying everything? And or is it going to be more of an anticlimax? All this comes to nothing as Satan's power is just taken from him, and then the new heaven and earth happens in a more of a subtle way. How do you envision the actual final moments to be? Is it going to be a huge dramatic Hollywood epic, or is it just going to be like a more of a bit of a nothing burger? Was actually not what it was hyped up to be. Satan never had that much power source. How do you see it panning out?
Yeah, I feel like, and again, sometimes I always hesitate to say this because again, it sounds like I'm might be fear mongering, but I'm not. But I do believe, and I base this on the writings of the Christians, of my forefathers. I base it on the early Christian writers, and the Bible itself. I have a whole video called "The Destruction of Earth." Okay, and so I do believe the earth will be destroyed by fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a few texts that I haven't actually I've researched but haven't reported on yet in video form, that they spell out everything that's going to happen as the earth is changed and as God then judges, and that's the final judgment. And that's it. Then it's all heaven. Um, so I stand firmly on that belief. I don't think anyone's ever going to cause me to change that belief because I'm basing it on these writings. And so I do believe that there is a destruction by fire specifically, and that then the judgment occurs. And it's I won't spoil anything because I'm going to do a video on this soon, but it's amazing what God's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it's epic. By the way, you do know, and I'm sure many of your viewers will know, that the elite have been for some time now, probably a couple decades, been building underground living spaces, underground cave, bunkers, whatever you want to call it. The mainstream has been unable to tell us at all what they're doing or why they're doing this. But I think that that is actually part of their understanding, that they are aware of some of these things, and they actually have seen some of these things. So I think that's the preparation that's going on. I could go deeper onto this conspiratorial side with all that, but I'll stop there for now. But that's what I believe. I believe that that's what's coming in our future.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so many agendas they can play out to deceive us as to what's happening in those final moments. I think
Yeah.
their aim is just to make us not understand what's actually happening when it happens. So they've played many narratives and brainwashing, mind control events and pre-programming media on us to get us to believe it's anything but what's actually happening, which is the final Gog Magog war and the final judgment. So it's kind of when that fire comes from heaven, everyone's programmed to believe solar flare or something like that. You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
Solar
Or
flare.
nuclear war. It's all just bombs going off everywhere that's causing all this
Yeah.
fire everywhere or something like that. It can't be anything but divine retribution from God himself. It has to be something that we can explain through the secular means. But those who have invented these narratives for us, they're hiding in bunkers underground because they understand they're going to try and hide from the wrath of God himself. Let them cook in the hot boxes underground. It's not going to save them. It means
Let
nothing.
them try. Yeah.
Exactly. Let them just waste all this resources on this fruitless effort anyway. And I guess that's the idea. It's kind of, to anybody else who's not a Christian, that sounds like a horrible thing. What do you mean we're all going to die? Like, I know we don't, but that's the thing when you have this blessed understanding that this is not the end. This is the end of the corruption that's coming.
That's right.
It's a purification moment more than anything. It's not a punishment necessarily. And I assume fire from God raining down from heaven is quick. I don't think it's going to
Yeah.
be he's not going to burn you and make sure you suffer a little bit first before you die. I don't think I think it's the idea of it's total annihilation. It's an instant. It's a blinking of an eye. Destruction. You're there. Great white throne judgment, or obviously the mercy seat.
Yeah.
It's all these that hopefully you should be covered by that point. I think that's the agenda. I think the elite are trying to do anything they can to make sure as many people are so deceived in those last moments that they weren't covered by the sacrifice and the blood of the lamb. And although
Man, I couldn't have said it better myself, Paul. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's really good.
Yeah, well, this is just this is Christianity. This is what it tells you
Yeah.
happens. You know,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't understand that it is a tautology. Okay, it's this is a monarchy. It is a tautology, and people don't like tautologies in this world. Mainly, maybe communism has something to do with that. I don't know, but these ideologies that it can't just be one truth. It has to be subjective to my personal reality, and it's like, nope.
Yeah.
It's going to go down one way, whether you like it or not, and they know that. They've just convinced you not to understand that, and it's. I don't think people get that just what Christianity really is. People imagine a Christian, they think of Ned Flanders. You know, they don't understand
That's true.
what it really is or what Christians believe. They have this caricature in their
Yeah.
mind, you know. And you know, we're talking about something far more epic than any movie they could watch happening here. And I think they're going to play some kind of alien invasion agenda card as well, you know, to explain these odd phenomena happening in the sky when, you know, Christ manifests or God's retribution does come in whatever form it does. They're going to say, oh, well, it must be aliens invading or something. Remember all those films you've watched? It's got to be aliens, right?
Right.
Anything but God is what they're going to program you to believe, you know?
Yeah.
And again, I only say this because I have to explain the programming. So why aliens everywhere? Why the push for destructive alien invasion? Why? Like, they're obsessed with making those films, and it's not just because they make money. People get bored of ideas, and they're constantly pushing it for a reason because there's some programming element here. Something's going to happen, and they know it,
Yep.
and they want you to have a belief about what that thing is when it goes down.
That's true.
And
Yeah.
again, just some of my own ideas. I don't want to throw you off there, but so
Not at all.
we've asked about the Gog and Magog war, the final
Yeah.
moments, and again, I've got to be very selective about the questions I ask now because each one of them is like a half an hour answer, I'm sure. But I want to cover the basics of the questions I always get asked as well. And
Well, I'm curious if you are going to ask me about Tartaria at all, because I have studied that a bit. Is that something you want to touch on or no?
Yes, but can I just ask a few questions first? We'll get to that in the end.
Sure.
We'll cover
Sure.
the last part of the show. We'll cover the Tartarian aspect.
Okay,
so
great.
A couple of questions I always get
Yeah.
is, who were the two witnesses and what was the mark of the beast then? Okay. What's your take on all of that?
Yeah, okay, those are good ones. Those are tough ones.
Yeah.
So I'll try to go short on those. But the two witnesses, I have over the years I've waffled a little bit on it. Right now, I again side with the early Christian writings, and the early Christian writings, specifically the Gospel of Nicodemus, talks about this very thing, and it says it is the two men who did not die. And of course, in the Bible, that's Enoch and Elijah.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were sent back to testify for God, and they did die because Jesus says in the New Testament, every man it is appointed once to die. And that writing explains very clearly that it's Enoch and Elijah. If I ever had any iota of literary evidence that it was anything besides that, then I would consider that again, but I don't have any. So for me, that makes sense. I can't explain to you, like, in history when that occurred. I can't explain that. Matching that with some historical moment, I can't do it. But I take that position just because that's what the early church was saying. That's what it is. So.
Do you think John is Elijah?
Who's that? John?
Do you think John was Elijah?
Well, I think he was a pattern of Elijah.
Yeah.
I don't think that was meant to be that John was Elijah. I think that was he is essentially that type of representative, and Elijah, if you will.
Okay. No, that's fine. I don't know. I just thought I'd throw that in there because it's another thing people.
Yeah.
A lot of people like to think that John is still alive today, waiting for the Christ to come back. That's kind of a popular thing right now, and he's actually somewhere around. Because I think Jesus did say, when Peter was asking like about the situation, Jesus was like, "What does it matter to you if John's still alive when I come back? You focus on your own mission," type of thing.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So people have argued, well, John must still be alive then, because Christ hasn't come back yet.
Yeah, and my response to that would be, well, he did come back in 70 AD, just as he said.
Yeah.
And so that being his coming, John was alive. In fact, John was one of the only apostles that was alive at his coming.
So it makes sense.
All the others had been martyred. So yeah, that's what I would say to that. He absolutely fulfilled those statements in the Bible. So we have no problem there.
That's fine. That's fair enough. So let's go on to the other difficult question. Mark of the
Oh,
Beast,
the Mark of the
Mark of
Beast.
the Beast
Yes.
candidate. What's that about from your perspective?
So the Mark of the Beast is an interesting one. Um, there is a couple instances in history that look somewhat like the Mark of the Beast, meaning there was a time in Rome, and I'm going to forget the exact time period and the emperor, but it was about the 200s or 300s AD, where there was an emperor who did require Christians to have a paper that they signed pledging allegiance to the emperor, essentially kind of like a mark. And I think it mentioned that they could wear that on their arm or something like that. So it makes you think, oh, that's like the mark of the beast. So there is that. But I personally don't think that's the specific thing that John is talking about in Revelation. I think what he's talking about in Revelation, because in another part of Revelation, you'll notice that the faithful, the righteous, are marked with the name of Christ in their foreheads, right? And the beast people, the people that worship the beast, they are marked in the foreheads with the name of the beast. You'll also find in the Old Testament a couple places where people are marked in the forehead or on the arm in certain instances. Like, for instance, I think in Ezekiel, there's a place where God is telling these angels to go through a town and kill all these wicked people, but don't kill the ones that are marked with the name of God on their forehead. The other interesting thing is he says, bind the law upon your, tie them as a, I can't remember how the verse says it, but it says tie them around your head and bind them on your arm. And it's, again, the idea, I think, relating to a spiritual concept that when you worship something, someone, you are marked with their name spiritually. It's not something that's going to show up on my skin, but in my spirit, I am marked for Christ because I am a worshiper of God and Christ. And so that's what I think the mark of the beast was. If people worshiped the emperor, they worshiped Rome, the beast system,
Mm-hmm.
then they received a spiritual mark, and it had to do with that judgment that was coming by the angels and by God.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see the mark as a spiritual mark, not a physical manifested thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been my take on it for a long time, especially since I saw those scriptures about different marks. It seems like it's this spiritual thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my take on the mark of the beast.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, a lot of people always want to say, well, it must have been Nero then, just because of the time period. But like you said, the beast was the beast. It was the fourth beast kingdom, more diverse than any other kingdom, and it was defined as a beast rather than an
Right.
animal in the prophecy of Daniel in his vision. So it's
Well,
kind
let me
of
say too, though, about the beast that I think the beast is how do I say, a demonic force, essentially a principality angel, like a bad angel.
yeah.
I think that beast is an angel. It worked through Nero at the time. In fact, the book of Revelation says that not only the king who is, which was Nero, was of the beast, but it says all of the other seven it's talking about were of the beast also.
Mm-hmm.
So it's saying that the beast was inside and working through all the emperors. It was working in Rome. The beast was the power behind Rome, is how I see it at that time.
Oh,
So,
absolutely, absolutely. I agree. I agree with
yeah,
you. I think
yeah.
it people want specifics and people and dates, and what I'm saying with this idea, it's not as fast and loose.
Well, we got to think spiritually about it too. It's not
Absolutely,
just
yeah.
a person, you know. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's a good answers. I like it. I like it a lot. That's what I think. So another one which I think might be worth just again, it's another one of those complicated things that you could go on for hours about. But this idea in Revelation, it says, blessed are those that take part in the first resurrection because they get to reign with Christ for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And I like your distinction there that they get to reign with him for 1,000 years, but Christ continues to reign. So there's a time period, it seems, where they're specifically involved in that moment or whatever's going on. But then it says, there's brackets involved in the new and in the NIV to separate this. But if you read the KJV, it can get complicated with what the language is saying here. But it says, the rest of the dead live not again till the 1,000 years has ended. This is the first. This is the first resurrection. But this is the first resurrection clearly is in parentheses just to finish the first point of those who reign with Christ for 1,000 years are the first resurrection. But as a side note, at the end, the rest of the dead come back after the 1,000 years. So, just to clarify that, who are the rest of the dead in your eyes, and when do they come back to life? Is that physically on Earth, or is that simply they are just raised for judgment at the end of the of the little season. Because in my definition, I'm thinking about this, that isn't exactly living again, suddenly just being resurrected and put
Right.
in front of the judgment seat.
Right.
That's not living again, and it's
Could be
implying
resurrected to heaven. Right. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No,
but go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go. Okay. Well, no, I think the short and terrible answer to this is I'm not 100% sure, and I'll be totally honest with you. Now, I will say this: someone brought it to my attention recently, one of my viewers, and I looked into it because I'm getting to where I know enough Greek and Hebrew to sometimes be able to look at manuscripts, and I can match the words and make sure I know what's being said in those manuscripts. I was able to go back to some very early manuscripts that have that passage in it. Codex Sinaiticus, for one, which I think is in the 200s, that was supposedly written.
Hmm.
That part of the verse that says the rest of the dead would live not until the thousand, that part is not in there.
Hmm.
I find that very interesting. I don't know that I can give you a 100% answer on that. I haven't studied it any further than that, but I did find that. I think that's very interesting because what it could be that Christians added that in later as a way to explain something that I'm not sure we fully understand, if that makes any sense. And I'm just at this point speculating, but I just as a plain blanket answer, I just don't really know what that part of that verse means. But I think you are right on the second part of the verse. It says, this is the first resurrection. It's talking about the story it just told you about the saints resurrected, reigning with Christ. That's the first resurrection. So I'll just have to leave it there that I'm just not too sure on that verse,
Mm-hmm.
what that first part means.
Because it's just the language as well. First resurrection implies there's going to be a second then. Because if that's the first, then the second is the rest of the dead.
Maybe I will say
You
this:
know.
the Greek there, although it does translate correctly to the word first, it also means primary or like initial.
Hmm.
So in the Greek, I don't think it's as first like as we think it is. It's a little more just like, this is the initial resurrection. This is it's the first one, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if the implication of a second is actually there. So
Yeah.
just be aware of that. The Greek's not quite as English as we want to make it.
Mm. Well, it's also a matter of timing as well. So when did that first resurrection take place exactly? Because we know when you read like Matthew, as soon as Christ resurrected, people rose from the grave. People were walking around
True.
talking
Yeah,
to
yeah.
people, and it's kind of, and then we don't know where they went. Really, it's not really defined what happened to them afterwards. Is it possible
Yeah.
they went up with Christ immediately? And it was literally as soon as he died on that cross and went down, he brought them out straight away, and that's it, up. Ascension immediately, and then obviously people waiting for his
Yeah.
return again. But from what I was reading the other day, it seems like perhaps that first resurrection event may have been over a period of time, because there was still yet the apostles to be martyred, and for the whole these other saints, which I assume would get to take part in that first resurrection event too, still had to die first, before they were. The Christians still needed to be beheaded. There's still stuff that needed
Yeah.
to happen. But then we have this resurrection event when Christ immediately was crucified. So
Yeah.
does the first resurrection encompass a period of time that took many years to accomplish? It wasn't just happened in 1 hour and that's it, it's all done. That's the first resurrection. I don't think that could have been the case from what I've
Yeah.
been looking into. And the first resurrection could have taken, I don't know,
I've
70
worked to
years.
reconcile this as well. I think you're on track there with that. And I've come to this, that what I've read in the early Christian writings is that when Christ went down to Hades at his death,
Mm-hmm.
he definitely redeemed all the righteous that had been there since Adam. Okay, that's an idea it's in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's in all the ancient writings. That was expected. He redeems them at that time. So when he died and came back, he definitely brought them into paradise. Now, the word paradise, it means the Garden of Eden, literally. And so when he says to the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise, he's literally telling him, because I'm going down there to get the other ones and I'm taking them all up. You're going to be there with us. And so that's what happened when Christ died and resurrected. But we also see in Revelation that when he was coming in judgment, that the saints who had died during that 40 years
Hmm.
between his ascension and 70 AD, it says that those saints who were beheaded for their witness would be resurrected. So that seems to be what it's talking about in Revelation 20.
Hmm.
So I've had a little trouble reconciling the two. Which is the first? And it's like I don't know for sure, but it seems like those two events did happen, both
Hmm.
those things. So I think your theory is as plausible as any. But yeah, it does seem like those things definitely happened. Yeah.
Yeah, well, obviously people love to throw out that, 1,000 years to the Lord is a day to him. It's nothing to him. So in
Yeah.
terms of like that time period, it would seem like one moment to him. At least people are being resurrected over different time periods, over 70-year period, let's say.
Sure.
So we could work it in any metaphorical. We could parse it out in our minds in many ways, but I think there's always going to be mysteries, and that's why we have to have faith. So I'm still okay with that myself. It doesn't negate anything else in my eyes. So there we go. Okay, so we've got the rest of the dead covered. So do you think there was a second resurrection? Was it at the end of the little season? That's when you think that's going to happen?
The way I understand it is that resurrection is ongoing now. Like if you die, we're going to be resurrected when we die.
Okay.
That's just the way that I see it, and I've seen some writings of the New Test or the early Christians that reaffirm that that there's not going to be a waiting. You're not waiting any longer. That was the whole point of what Christ did when he went down to Hades, was he kind of broke the bonds of death,
Hmm.
right? So that for Christians, he can take us right away when we're done with this life. So that's what I believe as far as what happens right now. I don't think anyone's going to be waiting around. Although the people that die that are not Christians are going to wait in Hades until the final judgment.
Hmm.
And then it says he's going to bring everyone up and judge according to works. But I think
Yeah.
I think Christians are exempt from that because of the blood of Christ.
Hmm.
But so I guess I don't see any other resurrection event, so to speak, where lots of people are resurrected at once. I think that those types of things have already occurred.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go into Tartaria then. What's your take on all of this?
Well, Tartaria is a tough one, and I think it's tough because a lot of people have a lot of history with some of the videos online and emotions tied up in it. I have studied this a little bit in some ancient writings, and then one I want to talk about is the travels of Marco Polo. And I've mentioned this multiple times on my channel. It was published in the year 1300. So this is an old writing,
Hmm.
but the entire book is about him traveling through Tartaria. Okay. The entire thing. It's not even like just a little portion. It's not like a line or two. It's the whole book. His part of his goal with his travels was to visit the Khan of Tartar and meet with him because the Khan had sent word to the Catholic Church that he wanted to investigate Christianity. He wanted someone to teach him about Christianity. And so Marco Polo goes to him as the messenger. He talks with the Khan. The Khan asks, "Can you send teachers back?" There's this negotiating that goes on. But the Khan also says that we have to keep it kind of secret. And it's interesting if you really read this thing. I mean, it's an amazing book. I would recommend anyone who's interested to read this book. The Khan says, I have to be careful about this. I can't go around telling everybody about this investigation into Christianity because I have a reputation, essentially. He's like, if I told everyone I was a Christian or something like that, my military leaders would turn on me, right? So he's being careful. He's trying to learn about Christianity without upsetting his order of his kingdom.
Hmm.
So it's interesting. Everything in the book that I'm talking about points to Tartary as a kingdom of essentially pagan warrior type individuals. Not necessarily all bad, but I mean, just it was pagan. I've also found another book on this. It's a book by a Russian named Nicholas Whitson, and it was published in 1705. And it's actually, the title is, you can't really find an English translation of this book. It's in Russian, but the title is North and Eastern Tartary. And so I've looked all through this book. The good thing about it is there's pictures.
Hmm.
And so I don't have to translate pictures. I've done little translations here and there, just using like Google Translate stuff to see what it's talking about. But it catalogs some of the pagan gods that the Tartars worshipped, right?
Yeah.
It shows drawings of their they had like 40-foot, 50-foot tall statues of their gods in these huge shrine houses, and they would worship them, right?
Hmm.
So I just think that when we see stuff like this, it's really good evidence that Tartaria was this place, but it wasn't necessarily a Christian place. You know, in Marco Polo, he credits the Khan with his amazing powers of being able to control such vast areas of land. And they had this military strategy where they would have regional rulers that would kind of enforce laws in the region, but then still allow other cultures to rule in those regions. So the Tartars were able to cover this huge, vast area of control, but keep it for them, right? Keep it
Hmm.
under control. So there's a lot of interesting stuff about that. I just have a hard time thinking that Tartaria was a very special Christian kingdom. I don't see any evidence of that.
Hmm.
But evidence of amazing buildings, probably. They probably did that, just like many nations did.
Yeah.
So that's all very interesting to me. And I mean, how do you feel about that? Is that I know that goes against a lot of people's, ideas, but
Well, for me, I don't know many Tartarian researchers who equate it to being Christian at all. Most of the
mm,
Tartarian community are anti-Christian. They
mhm,
are trying to equate this lost ancient civilization that spanned the entire Earth, that built incredible
right,
technological buildings that harnessed the etheric energies from the Earth for free energy everywhere. And you can see
right,
all over the Earth is this shared architectural style that is in places where it has no business being, in places that today are third world countries that would not have had the resources in their time to build these type of Romanesque style, architectural style buildings. And the only explanation is that there was an ancient civilization of possibly giant advanced humanoids that we are the ancestors of, and it has been buried from us after a cataclysmic mud flood. And after that major reset, the controllers now control everything and hide the truth from us of free energy. And it's kind of that's the narrative of the Tartarian
yeah,
narrative. And it's to try. It sounds like a secular New Age explanation for the millennial reign of Christ, a
interesting,
time where humanity was unencumbered by Satan and had the capacity and freedom and inspiration. They were inspired, these people, to build
yeah,
such a beautiful world to inhabit. But they want to equate it, like you said, to this barbaric, disparate tribes of a specific region in Siberia and Russia and Middle Asia, to encompassing the whole Earth, and it's kind of there's no evidence for that. Like
mm.
that's not
Well, I
exactly,
wouldn't say there's no evidence, but the evidence that we got. So this is one thing that I always say, because I've seen a lot of the pictures and videos and some of the material, and it's impressive. Some of it's incredible to think about and try to grapple with. Where does that come from? Who built that? What did they use this for? All those questions are good questions. But again, I would have to go back to, can we find primary source material that really helps us? And what I feel like I found in the Marco Polo book and in the Nicholas Whitson book is pretty good source material for understanding more about Tartary.
Mhm.
Now that doesn't mean all those theories are wrong, but it clarifies. It helps us clarify. It helps us go down the right path, I think.
Yeah, well, the maps show that it was a huge spanning empire.
Yeah,
Like it did,
absolutely.
and if you look at northern Siberia on these old maps, it's completely built out. Like
Yeah,
there's cathedrals everywhere and cities and names and all sorts. But if you look at
yeah,
Siberia today on Google Earth, it's a wasteland. There's nothing there. Northern Siberia is just a cratered tundra. Like
yeah,
there's nothing there. But these maps, which are like only 300 years old, show that it was full of life and buildings and
right.
cities and all and everything. So what happened? Some
Yeah,
cataclysmic, destructive, seriously destructive thing happened that did kind of wipe that entire civilization off the map. And I
yeah.
think what people call Tartary today, what you may have actually seen there was maybe perhaps the loosing of Satan and an attack on or a burying of these things, perhaps. Because again, what about the
Could
mud?
be.
What about the mud flood? How do we explain this cataclysmic event that seems to have buried buildings either 5 feet underground or in some cases 20 foot completely buried, and we're just digging them out. I mean, most of, like, for example, Roman ruins that we know of that we see today, they were completely underground originally. They've been
Yeah.
excavated. What happened to put all of these things under the ground? And I think a lot of people who are really against the Millennial Kingdom theory or the Little Season theory say that was the flood of Noah that did buried all these buildings. And it's kind of, how long ago do you think the flood of Noah was? Like, no way does this have anything to
Yeah.
do with what happened
Yeah.
perhaps 4 to 5 thousand years ago. The buildings wouldn't
Right.
have lasted that long, you know. And it's kind of to wrap their brain around sticking to a futurist doctrine. They have to equate it to the flood of Noah because that's the only destructive event they were aware of that fits their eschatology, you know. And it's kind of, no, it doesn't work. And another thing that's quite interesting about the Antiquitech buildings that are everywhere is that even India, which has a rich history of a completely different religion to us, and their architecture is
Yeah.
ancient, you know, far ancient, even they have Antiquitech style buildings equivalent to the same things in Europe with the way they've built their spires and arches to harness energy. Even they have
Yeah.
built their structures in the same manner, just with their own cultural, aesthetical flourishes, the Indian style of architecture.
Yeah.
And China has done the same thing, but they have their Chinese style of doing it. You know, the principles are the same, the aesthetics are slightly different because that's culturally relative, you know. And so I don't think it's as fast as Lou says. It was one empire, specifically Tartary, that was harnessing and utilizing the ability of the time to build buildings that could do incredible things. I think
Yeah.
it's all evident that every culture would have been inspired by a time where relative peace was on earth and the devil was hidden. You know, the devil
Yeah.
was locked up. And maybe not all cultures came to Christ necessarily, but they were still living and blessed to live during a time where the devil wasn't around,
Yeah.
you know.
Absolutely. No,
So,
all that you're saying makes a lot of sense. And again, I just want to reiterate that I am also amazed and confounded by, like you said, when you're talking about the structures in India and the different buildings, some of that stuff is as amazing as anything else I've ever seen, and it's
mhm.
just, I guess my jury's just out, it's just out still until I can find some stuff that really ties that stuff together for me. Um, yeah, so I'm right there with you. It sounds good. One thing I found that I think is interesting, I'd like to bring it to light because I've never heard anyone teach this before, and I found this just in this research this week about the Tartars. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of this, but we talked earlier about how the power structures of the world try to use Bolshevism, communism, different things like this to change and force us into certain ways of functioning as a society. Well, this seems to have happened also in regards to the Tartars, and it's very recent. I couldn't believe it when I ran across this. I ran across something that they call in Wikipedia, they call it the deportation of the Crimean Tatars. Tatars, not Tartars, Tatars. So there's no R's, no extra R's. So when you search, you cannot find this event, right?
Mhm.
Because you're looking for Tartars. Well, I read about this. It's interesting. The Tatars, they are the same people as the Tartars. They changed the name. The name Tatar is a Persian form of Tartar. So it's almost like they intentionally changed this so we couldn't find this information. And here's why I don't think they wanted us to find this information. And I'm just throwing this out. It's something interesting I think people will like.
Mhm.
This event was in 1944, towards the end or middle-ish of the Second World War. It actually was a genocide of Tartars in the Crimean region in Russia. They genocided, the Soviet Bolsheviks genocided the Tartars in Crimea in 1944. This is May 20th, May 18th through 20th. Almost 200,000 of them. And the ones that weren't killed were shipped off to Siberia in rail cars. Okay.
Mhm.
And the reason this is interesting to me is because I have been really researching the world wars just recently to kind of refresh myself. I'm probably going to do some material on this soon. But I think that the reason they don't want you to find this is because it smears the communists' name. It smears communism again. Smears socialism essentially. Because if you don't know much about the Soviet Bolsheviks, I can't think of another more evil thing on earth than what happened during that time period in Russia when the Bolsheviks took over. They did this to these Tartars. They did it to many people groups. But I just encourage people if they're interested. Apparently, from what I've read now about this, the up until the what is it called, the Crimean War in the 1800s also triggered another mass exodus of Tartars out of the region of Crimea. So even up until the last century, the Tartars were still living in the area of Ukraine and Crimea.
Hmm.
So isn't that interesting? I mean, I just think I don't hear people online talking about this stuff, but when I see the evidence for it, I think we really should look into this stuff.
So do you think this
Just
could relate to why we even have this war right now? That's whatever's actually going on in the Ukraine currently, whatever the real strategical reason behind it is. Could it have some relevance to the burying of or the hiding of this civilization? Perhaps is that what you're trying to say?
It could. It could. I'm just saying that, if we're interested in Tartaria, we
Hmm.
should study this stuff too. We should know the history of these people.
Hmm.
So very interesting stuff. I just
Well,
thought I'd throw it in
there's
there.
nothing left
Yeah.
of these people. This is the issue. Is that there's nothing. Even the people that are left probably don't know much of their own history either. I think it's kind of a true
Yeah.
revision.
Well,
History is written by the winners, and they lost. Like they
that's true.
lost big time, you know.
That's
And
true.
again, if you look at even Siberia now, it's relatively stuck in a time warp
Yeah.
of like it's not advanced at all, you know, and people are still living in yurts in the middle of like tundras, and it's kind of there's not really much to it. Then obviously you go the other side of the mountains, the Ural Mountains, and it's Russia, isn't it? You know, which is built up and more of a modern civilization. But yeah,
Yeah.
the stories that came out of communism in that time period is disgusting. It's
Crazy.
and obviously I think
Absolutely.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote quite a lot about being in one of those camps, and just the mindset of that time. The people turning against one another, eating each other alive, literally in some respects as well, because of
Yeah.
starvation. And it's kind of it was a yeah, and
Amazing.
the people behind it all, the true people behind it all. You know, when you could look at our research, you realize what's really going on there. It's kind of I'm not sure I'm allowed to
Right.
talk about it on YouTube, but it's
That's
kind
right.
of
That's right.
yeah. But people know what I'm talking about. You know
Yeah.
this yeah. Dark, very dark. So we've been going for almost 2 hours. I got 1 hour 43 on the clock here. Okay, so we can go for another
Good
10,
deal.
10 minutes, 15 minutes.
All
We've
right.
covered a lot of ground so far. Do you want to tell us what you're working on currently and where your research is currently taking you? Because I do know you just released, like I said, a video quite recently. Do you want to maybe expound upon that, or do you want to go into more of the recent things you're going to be releasing soon? Give us a sneak peek.
Yeah, I guess so. I'll mention that the video I just released recently, I released a video on Gog and Magog, and it traces the Gog Magog land area through history. It's really good. I really got a lot out of it myself. I recommend it. As far as stuff I'm researching now and trying to do, and let me think here. I always take, of course, comments from my viewers and I use those. But again, one thing I'm severely focused on is the Second World War. And of course, it's going to be touchy to treat some of that without getting, in trouble by YouTube or whatever. But I think I can do it. So I'm trying to treat some of the injustices, some of the things we've been talking about just now, of that war in a video or two. So there's that. I believe what I'm also going to do is probably take the material we've talked about today and make a Millennium video, just because we've got the material now. I've covered it. It's there, and I don't have to do the research for it. So that's one thing I think I'll do. As far as it's interesting, like where the channel takes me and where my interests are is interesting because sometimes they are together and sometimes they diverge, right? Sometimes I think people want to know more about this or that, and sometimes my interests are going over here. But I think I like to do symbolism videos. I'm probably going to do a couple symbolism type videos, exposing the symbolism. Particularly, I'm interested in movies
Hmm.
because I have background in movie making and cinematography, and so it's one of my areas of interest. So there's probably going to be a video on that coming at some point in the future.
Yeah.
Um, Other than that, I think that's the main things on my radar. Um, I've done so many things now. There's so many videos. Sometimes I'm starting to go back through some of my material and cull some of the older stuff and maybe redo things too. So
Mhm.
there's always that
Yeah.
kind of thing going on. But yeah, and then I guess through, just the other thing I'm constantly working on is the application, the tool that you mentioned that I use for my Bible study. Um, I even this past week I added about 6 or 7 different writings to that tool. And so the more I get on there, the more valuable it becomes for me and for anyone else who's using it. So that's another focus that I spend a lot of time on.
Fantastic. Yeah. I haven't. I quickly. People know I do everything last minute on this channel. I very quickly threw up our live stream. You know what I mean? And I haven't put the links to your stuff other than your YouTube channel in the description, but I do need to link your website and then to that resource as well. So I will put the links in the description. Hopefully, people listening to this later will see that it's there. So
Yeah.
go to the description of this video to go check out your obviously David's work here. It's brilliant. It's thorough, and obviously you're very cool, calm, collected, and level-headed with your research, which I enjoy. And for speculative idiots like me, it's good to be grounded sometimes and see what people have
No.
actually read. So I appreciate people like you coming on just throw the knowledge out there, and for our audience, obviously, it's more like a grounding method, I find, because we can get stuck in our own echo chambers and our own thoughts sometimes, that we need to hear other people's opinions just to understand there are other school of thoughts out there on this
Well, and
topic.
I would just add to that I would never expect anyone to just take what I said, for instance, on this stream and just run with it. The reason I mention references, the reason I mention the books is so that you can check it too. And I would encourage you to do that yourself and then decide if anything I said was true. So
Mhm.
I would just throw that out too.
No, obviously, like I said, we're all in this together. We're all brothers
Yeah.
and sisters in Christ. At the end of the day, I never particularly saw this as a salvation issue. This is more of a extra,
Oh, right. No.
an extracurricular, get close to knowing God thing. If
Yeah.
so, but the gospel's still the same. John 3:16 still stands. It is what it is, and you understand that it's
Yes.
on your logo right there. And as long as you've got the basics down, you're covered. That's all that really matters at the end of all of this. So again, I just love getting into these topics and hashing it out. Someone said in the comments earlier, because you mentioned obviously we were talking about the mark of the beast, and this is another one I get quite a lot. So it's good they reminded me. But you mentioned obviously it's a spiritual thing. Okay, and I've mentioned in my videos, well, the mark of the beast would have already happened if we're
Mm,
post all of that now. And
yeah.
then people's rebuttals are, you're deceiving people and leading them away from the truth, and you're going to make them take the mark of the beast because they think it's already happened. And
Yeah.
my response has always been, we're not suddenly low IQ morons who are going to take some kind of thing in our forehead and arm just because we now think it's already happened. We're not stupid. Like, why would we take anything that could be equivalent to or akin to something like a mark of the beast? Why would we suddenly just do that all of a sudden? And how do you deal with that response? What do you have to that? Because
Well, I think I proved myself in 2020 with the pandemic, so I don't have to prove that I wouldn't take something in my body any
exactly.
longer, but the problem is, if we're looking for a mark now, the problem is, when are you going to decide what the mark is? They already have RFID chips you can put in your body. You can do that already. Um, you know, so my problem is, like, I don't know when the mark is here, if it's a physical one and if it's in our future. Is it when they decide they want to put implants in your body? Some people have said that the doctors, they already put implants in you through the pills that they give you, that they're hidden and you already have it. You just don't know it. So in that case, if you think that's the mark, then a lot of Christians have the mark. I don't know how to explain all that stuff in the modern context. It doesn't make any sense. And so I would just encourage people that are looking for a mark to question, you're like, if that warning, if the warning in Revelation, written almost 2,000 years ago, was for me, then how has it helped me identify the mark? It really hasn't. I can't
Mhm.
identify it in the modern time. So I don't know. I would just challenge you with that.
Yeah, I mean, my argument has been as well in revelation of this new revelation. If just thinking about these ideas, it's like, okay, so if the mark of the beast has already happened and much of these prophecies have already come to pass and tribulation has already happened, And then what we see today as the signs of the times of Christ's return are completely fabricated, convoluted, made up, orchestrated theatre for us to take part in, including the multiple marks of the beasts that have come over the decades. People used to think it was barcodes at one point. People used to think it was just simply
Right.
using a chip and pin cash card, and then before you know it, you're getting your card on your wrist, and then you're getting it on your phone, and then the RFID chip turns up. Which one's the mark of the beast then?
Right. Right.
But there's always that hype every year where it's like they're purposely releasing something that could be considered the mark of the beast, like the Neuralink or something like that, and now AI and all these type of things, and it's going to give power to the image of the beast. This is AI, and it's kind of, I feel like it all just feels like a really badly written script now. I feel like because the media's on board with it. They're not even trying to
Yeah.
hide it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like I've equated it to like, whoops, I've actually accidentally dropped this top secret file on the internet. I hope nobody sees it, it feels like that's
Yeah.
what they're doing, It's like they want us to keep us locked into the wrong time in our minds. They want us constantly
Right.
in fear of the coming of the Lord. And even then, we shouldn't have any fear over that. But
Right.
I've seen no fruit come out of futurist eschatology other than fear. I have seen
Yeah.
nothing
And
other than that come from it.
and I would agree with you 100% because I think the fear is what they can use to control you.
Mm-hmm.
If they get you running from this to that, they don't care whether this is right or that's right. They can say this is the Antichrist. They can say that's the mark. And if they can get you running from here to there, they've won. That's the control they want, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they will use those things. I think that's in their playbook to use those things. You mentioned the alien, thing that they may do with a blue beam situation or whatever.
Yeah.
They're going to use all these things against us as best they can. That's their goal.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to do it. And it's not real. It's not God, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I would just caution people in that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think you're right.
So what do you think, and a kind of maybe like a final topic here, how do you think they're going to convince people to make war with the camp of saints? What do you think? Because how would people, if people understood that was the quote unquote, first of all, I guess you have to define what you even think the camp of saints even is, because that's up for speculation as well. But it's
Yeah.
kind of how would people who knew that was Christ go to war with him? You know what I mean? It seems like it implies that they must be deceived in the situation and not actually know what they're going to make war with. How do you think they're going to? Because I've speculated it's the alien invasion card. We will think we're under attack by aliens and we're going to go and defend ourselves.
Yeah.
That seems like a good way of getting people on board.
Yeah.
Like what did Reagan say? Sometimes I imagine how quickly our differences would all disappear if we were under threat from some outside alien force.
Yep.
And it's kind of that's the agenda, isn't it? That would bring everybody together and suddenly have one giant 9 billion by that point, perhaps population strong army. Who's like a number of the sands of the sea. Let's say.
Yeah.
And that's my speculative theory there, but do you have any thoughts on that idea?
Well, I do. It's a little complicated to get into, but I'll just do this. I'll plug that Gog Magog video I just did because
Okay.
I addressed that, but it goes pretty deep, and so you kind of have to be there to see it. So I won't make any speculation about that, but
Okay.
the Gog and Magog video has some interesting conclusions that I don't think many people think about, and it's based on historical evidence from the region of Gog and Magog.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'll leave it there. I'll just leave that one. But I think again, that's one of those things that even that video, although I did a lot of great research in it, it's still at the end, it's a little bit speculative as to whether that matches Gog and Magog or is just good information to know that helps you.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'll leave that one on the table if that's all right.
Cryptic. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah,
No, that's
yeah.
fine. Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll admit I haven't watched the video yet, so I do have to go back and watch that.
Oh, that's okay.
But it has
That's okay.
been shared on the Telegram. And you know what it's like when you're making videos, you just don't have time to watch other people's videos.
Oh, yeah,
It's one
no,
of those type of things.
absolutely.
But I'll definitely give it a watch at your recommendation now, and then I'll get an answer to my question there. But I like it a lot. So we're almost at the 2-hour mark now. This has been a wonderful conversation, David. I think we might have to get you back on to do this again some other time, because we've just scratched the surface of so many facets of this concept and idea that I need all the help I can get, and I think we all want to know as much as we can. So we'll do this again sometime. Before we leave, do you just want to give people a last minute plug away? This is your chance. Go for it.
Well, I'll just first say that I really appreciate it, Paul. This has gone obviously great, and I've loved it every minute. So I would definitely be, up for doing something else in the future. Just let me know. And yeah, I'll just plug my website. It's bible-scribe.com. I've got it on my screen. I'm not sure how visible that is, but um, it has everything. So I've tried to make it so that if you go there, you can find everything else. My YouTube channel, and it has a catalog of all my work. So if you're interested in any of it, you can go there. The other thing you can do there is you can contact me straight away. I just literally put my email address on the contact page there. So you can just email me directly. I have no worries about that. I don't get a lot of spam, or I can handle it if I do. So just go ahead and email me if you have something you want to ask about or thinking about, and I'm there. I do this as a second job, really. I'm a little more limited in my time than some guys who are full-time on YouTube, but I do my best to get through the emails each week and really connect with people, because I think that's actually what's most important about the work we're doing. We are learning. We're all learning. But like you said, most of this is not a salvational issue necessarily, but we're getting closer to God. And for some of us, that's very important right now. And I love just connecting with everybody, going through the information, starting with sources and showing people what's out there, and hearing what people have to say about it. It's great. So I love all that. The only other thing I'll mention is I do that Sunday live stream every Sunday at 10:30 Eastern, 9:30 Central in, of course, America. But you're welcome to join from anywhere. We have a lot of fun. I take questions every week and I do them live. I don't prepare for that. So it's you guys in the chat talking to me and me talking about what I know, and just going back and forth on these different topics that are important to people. So we have a blast, and I would encourage anyone that's interested in that to do that with me. But
And that's
yeah,
that's
that's it.
that's 9:30, 10:30 a.m. Correct?
AM. Yes, I
Yes.
should have
That's it.
said that. Yes,
I know. I
AM.
only know that because I tuned in today in the afternoon at like 3 o'clock. So I thought, okay, so this is the morning for him, and that's it. So
Right,
I
right.
just thought I'd bring that up. Yeah, but yeah, go check it out. Go check out his work, guys. Join in on the Sunday talks as well. They're really good. Like, he does just line up the questions and just fire them off one at a time, and he seems to be open to literally talking about any question that people ask you, which is great.
Do my best.
That's absolutely. Somebody who does a Q&A myself, I understand
Yeah.
it's a good thing. It's a fun thing. It builds community, and I really appreciate that you do that yourself. So yeah, thanks for being here, and everyone listening.
Awesome.
As always, God bless.
Thanks.